Why do the traditional LSPs need to reinvent themselves in order to stay competitive? If you want to learn about technology in the localization industry and how it drives innovation, you have to watch this video. Hi everyone, my name is Andre and this is the latest episode of the Localization podcast number 27 with Patricia Paladini Adell. Patricia used to be the globalization director at CA Technologies before she ventured into her own consulting business. She will tell you how it is to think and act like a developer, salesman, and a project manager. She will also share a very interesting way how to educate your internal teams on the best localization practices. For more interviews like this, please consider subscribing. Thank you very much. Right. Hello, Patricia. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Where exactly are you located right now?
Right now, I'm located in a very small room of my apartment because I'm in Barcelona and we have this COVID-19 situation. So basically we are locked down at home. So I'm really locked down in my home, really locked down because I'm basically trying to cope with all the activities and the family life and work and presentations through this new situation we are living right now. Hopefully in a couple of weeks we will allow to go out and get some fresh air and situation will get better and we will enjoy the outdoors again.
Yeah, Spain is one of the worst countries that were hit by COVID, right?
Yes, I think we are the second worst. But we're doing good. We're doing good, and the situation has really improved. And you can see all these curves getting down. So we have gone through over the peak, and we are doing good. So situation is starting to change. Not the economy, obviously. This is really hitting not only the health but also the economy. But at least from the health point of view, we are starting to recover, and people is starting to feel a little bit safe. And people is really doing a good job. People is really staying home, helping each other. It's a really interesting situation from a sociological point of view, I would say. It's really, we are learning a lot.
From your LinkedIn profile, I believe that you started your own company just quite recently. I think it's maybe less than a year, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So how has your life changed with COVID? Like, were you working a lot from home before, or did you have an office to go to?
No, I'm working from home, and I think I started officially my own company like the day before the lockdown. So that's very interesting.
Good timing. Good timing.
No, but I'm working. I was planning to work from home, so that's kind of nice. No major changes. But yes, I started my own company, Paladini Global. I want to provide consultancy services to companies in order to help them to streamline the localization process by implementing the right workflows, so they can, make localization like basically an afterthought instead of having to spend time, people, and money to set up the globalization process.
Yeah, we'll talk about that more later. I would be interested to find out how you got into localization in the first place, if you remember that.
Yes. That was a long time ago, I'm afraid to say. I studied biology. That was what I did study right when I was 18. So I studied biology. And I was really enjoying it, but I was also enjoying very much languages. So at some point I decided that I wanted to become a medical translator. So I moved from biology to translation, a translation school at college, and basically specialized on medical translation because I have all this biology background. However, when I was just about to finish my degree and the master's and everything, I come across to some modules, some hours in a particular course of what they call translation technology applied to translation. That was very new. I mean, we didn't even have an email that time at college. Okay. And translation memories and CAT tools were just happening. So that was very, very early process. And then I kind of realized that localization, meaning adapting software and to translating software interfaces at that time, plus the technology that kind of help translators to translate, to do really take a lot of profit of translation. And again, remember in that time, dictionaries were on paper. So we had to go to exams, with old dictionaries because we didn't have laptops yet. Then I realized that was very interesting. And I basically thought, well, that's the future. The old translation techniques with paper and dictionaries, this is not going to stay. So that's how I specialized on CAT tools. Initially, I started working on CAT tools, so I became a CAT expert. I was a Trados expert at that time for a company I used to work in Dublin at that time. And then I went back to college teaching CAT tools and technology applied to translation and localization. And after that, I started to working on a corporation, which basically they needed to set up from scratch the whole globalization thing. So I was taking care of the technology also from the very first time.
Was Trados one of the early CAT tools?
Trados was one of the early commercial CAT tools. There were another ones like Omega, and that time we had Devops, we have Transit, Trados, and I think a couple of more, but they were really simple. Basically, you have this dongle that you had to attach. Maybe you are too young for that, but we were supposed to
I remember dongles. Yeah.
Dongles to the laptops. On top, you would plug in the printer, and that, and if you didn't have a dongle, you were dead, basically. So that, I think those were the initial tools we were working with, especially at college, at least. And not everybody was working in language agencies or language providers. They were still delivering translations on paper or on floppy disk. I'm feeling very old right now, I have to say. Anyway.
I know a lot has changed, right, in those years.
A lot has changed.
So you mentioned that you worked for this corporation. I think we can say it was CA Technologies because it's on your LinkedIn profile, right? And if I'm not mistaken, you worked there for 12 years, right? And you were the globalization director. So I'm wondering, what are your memories? How has the localization evolved during those years?
I worked it was Computer Associate, that was the original name. Then it changed to CA Technologies. That's a North American corporation of software. They basically produce software, and we were helping the corporation to localize all this software, the products. Things have changed a lot. When I was hired, and I was hired as a translator, by the way, as a Spanish translator, but in a couple of months, I become a translation manager, and I think it was 2 years later, I become a director, globalization director. At that beginning, they didn't have any tool, any technology in place. So basically, we were getting files for translations through email. And not, the worst part of that is that we were doing software localization. So we would get a TXT file that was supposed to be a multi-language file. So you were supposed to translate the Spanish after the French and then send it to somebody else, maybe to this team. So they would type in that TXT file the Chinese and then the Japanese, and they go back to the project manager. So that was horrible.
It must have been such a long cycle, right? If it's language after language. It didn't run in parallel?
No, because there was no share option. So basically, you could not, if you want to run in parallel, that means somebody has to copy paste.
Yes.
All the answers. Yes. It was a disaster. Well, that's why they hired the whole team. So that was good. and right, then we start to realize that this is not gonna work. And they brought in, is that okay to mention tools, commercial tools?
Yeah, of course.
So they brought in at that time SDL workflow, which was some kind of online platform, SDL based. And that was what we used. We set up to use that platform for documentation. All the documentation was in Authorit at that time. And I was expert in FrameMaker and several other DTP tools because I had been teaching those tools at college. I was teaching at college at the master's. So basically, we set up this Authorit, which was similar from from a content management tool to FrameMaker. So we set up SDL workflow connected to Authorit in order to translate the documentation. So that was kind of the first CAD tool that we happened to have. There was a lot of limitations at that time, so we end up downloading those IDD files, sending them to the translation provider, or doing the translation in-house. That was a mixture. And on the software side, we decided to use Catalyst at that time. And obviously this improved a lot our process. So we started to have time managing terminology, putting together proper term base, etc. But those tools, as I said, had a lot of limitations because everything was desktop. Sharing translation memories was not really on real time was not an option. For the particularity of the software files we used to have as CA technologies, Catalyst was not really able to support them because we did have like mainframe files, which are totally different story, and huge products for desktop, IT desktop tools and security. So basically, Catalyst was not really the best tool to use. So what we decided, we kept the Authorit SDL workflow part for a while, and we decided to concentrate on software. And we did develop software tools. We developed software tools, internal software tools that would support those mainframe files and any other file type. We were working with more than 70 different file types. Basically, the products that CA Technology was selling at that time, most of them, there was not that many organic development. Most of the projects were created by acquisition. So CA would acquire different softwares and they would put together with some others and create a suite. So imagine the legacy we would have there, like different codings, languages, different translations done by all sorts of companies. So managing all these huge amount of files and all this legacy content was really a challenge. So that's why we decided to develop two kind of tools for software localization. One was a source code scanner. We wanted to make sure that the files that development teams were turning us for translation were actually translatable.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have embedded text, that they were supporting Unicode, that variables and tags were used in some kind of standard way, etc. And the other tool we created was an editor, a translation editor for software files, very much customized to our needs, because the only way we would find out to parse to generate those resource files for translation out of this mare magnum of coding and file formats was using generating like intermediate file format, which would contain the English, the translation, and a lot of metadata, because metadata was the key in order to get those files translated. And the only way to process this file, which was a TXT file, was doing that our own editor. And I was involved in all this process from the very beginning. And that was, for me, the best learning in this area I have ever had. So for me, working at CA Technology, was really, really, really a great opportunity to understand our area from the very bottom, because we were solving challenges all the time. And sometimes it was really frustrating, I would say. However, it was really a learning experience because I managed to think like a developer, like a salesman, like a project manager, how can you manage cost when you are developing a tool? This helped me also to manage multilingual teams worldwide. So I was managing people in India, developers in China, developers in Japan, translators, project managers, sales guys, because we were supposed to contact sales guys to try to understand what were the localization requirements, etc. So that was like the best school ever for me on our area. And after the software, then we move away from Authority and SDL workflow. We moved to another cloud-based solution for documentation. Documentation moved to Confluence, which is a wiki type content editor, and then we connected to Lingotech, which is a cloud-based TMS. So we were always heading, changing and ahead of the industry, I would say. We were one of the first ones implementing machine translation. We implemented machine translation, I think, in 2007 or 8, where machine translation was really new in the area. I mean, not the concept of machine translation that has started in the early 70s, last century, but the how to apply this to software localization and documentation. Basically, how American companies work. Basically, out of the box or out of the blue, you would get somebody saying, "Okay, we need to reduce cost by half. How can you do that?" So, okay, so we have to translate double the half cost. So we have to implement machine translation.
So that was the main driving factor why you gave MT a shot at that time?
Yes. And I'm going to say something which will, sound very unpopular in the industry. But at that time we had a team of 120 people worldwide. Okay. And for a large corporation, this type of huge teams doing localization testing, translation, validation, review, everything, that was the ideal scenario. This is not sustainable in this type of companies, because when they look at the numbers, the first thing you see is, why do we need so many people? And why do we have such a huge budget for translation? So my role, or at least not at the beginning, because I was participating that day, I took the role, but the unspoken goal was to dismantle the team, was to reduce the team. And it was really, really hard, because we had very good people, extremely good people, that we have to terminate. Because when we implement machine translation, obviously, we negotiated better rates with the vendors. We eliminate the internal translation team. We eliminate all the testing team. That was a progressive, it didn't happen overnight. But we moved in 10 years, we moved from 100 plus people, 120 plus people to 9 people to manage everything. And the volumes were huge, were double, basically. Mm-hmm. And going through that process, as I said, was really painful, because for me was like, we have the best team in the world. Why do we have to dismantle it? But now, not now, but, in the latest years at CA, I realized that is the approach. That is the trend in the market. So you cannot go against market trend. It doesn't matter. You need to take advantage of that situation and invent and innovate. So the last years I was at CA, my main role was basically innovation. Apart from managing the process, because we managed to get to a very high level of automation. But apart from managing, I was really innovating and looking at the market, looking at the trends, and seeing how could we implement those trends in the market.
How do you remember the first response of all the translation teams when they saw machine translation? I can assume that like when you started, like the quality was probably pretty poor, right?
The first shot was really bad. People, didn't want to use machine translation, didn't want to become post editors. But we did something, not me, but the team did something which I think was very clever. Is that, we told them that that's what we have to do. So that's the upper management goal. We have to implement that. But it became their own project. Okay. So what we did, because that time machine translation, there was no neural machine translation, not at all. So what we did was involve the internal team or evaluating different engines. So we were using different engines based on for each language, okay, depending on the evaluation we had done. And there was a mixture of rule-based and statistical based at that time. And we involved the team on educating the engine and also training the engines and training the technical writers and developers. So we spent a lot of time working with technical writers and developers on how to write for machine translation. And that was done by the translation. So the translators became the content educators for machine translation. And they embraced the project. That will help them to embrace the project because they could see that going through all this education for technical writers and developers, the output of the MT was very good. So they realized that the output was really improved, especially for rule-based, because, and we were using, technical writers were using Acroling at that time. So we worked with the Acroling team to create Acroling rules for machine translation. So basically the output was very good. So internal translators plus or language service providers, they really, they realized that they were translating more in less time. So although the rates were obviously lower, the output was very positive.
So I assume that if you were at the forefront of innovation when it comes to like maybe like even like our industry in general, is that like where the idea originated for you to become a consultant later on with your own business?
Yeah, I think so, because I happened to sit next to the VP of innovation in the company. This guy was hired in Barcelona and he was driving the innovation, and he was working he had different projects with different teams, and he was working like a startup mentor. So I learned a lot because I started working with him, machine translation, in crowdsourcing, a lot of different projects. We even created a decision support system to select what to translate and how to translate. Maybe we can talk about that later. But I really learned on how to evaluate the industry and how to design processes and tools from a startup point of view. That you go for a minimal VMO product, that you look for funding, you pivot as necessary in order to accommodate to the requirements. And this industry, at that time, the industry starts changing a lot. So I got this ability or this expertise, if you want, on to identify the requirements in our area and to try to find and design innovations. And yes, as you said, I think that's what helped me when I took the decision that maybe I should start my own consultancy. This way of thinking, this training that I had at TA, working with the innovation team, really helped me to understand how to become a consultant, how to ask the right questions for different companies, in order to understand what are the requirements, and how to challenge also the technology that's already in the industry.
Yeah, I'm really impressed and also kind of surprised that you kind of like had this like a startup hub within like a big organization. I think that's like very, very important. And many big organizations fail because like they're slow and they're used to their processes, they've been using for many years, but they lack this kind of like this startup mindset to test and explore new things, which I believe is what you guys were doing. And I really like that.
Yeah, CA was very good. We had one of the stakeholders that was hired by CA to lead this innovation, that was my VP, the innovation VP manager. He used to work from Xbox. He was the guy that did all the Xbox. So basically, that was innovation was managed at CA as a startup. But this is also happening now to a lot of companies. I mean, this is today, you go to Amazon, they work like small startups. I think they even have like a wall somewhere that, you have an idea, you write it down and, you get votes. And if it is voted in, you go to a certain number of votes, you go and develop. So although CA Technology was a very traditional software development company at the beginning, they were leaders in innovation, and they were also leaders in things like Devops and how to, cloud-based technology and Devops, how to develop tools in this Devops area, and how to adjust or redesign the software to work, to follow the trends in the market.
So did the shift left approach originate during CA, or did you have it afterwards?
My shift left localization approach originated during CA. Because we realized, or, I realized, especially with this new innovation hat or mentality I had, that the globalization team or the translation team traditionally was a very reactive team. So they react. Something happened. Oh my God, terminology is wrong. You react, but it's always late. It's always a reaction, and you always have a pure project manager in the middle, trying to wear all the hats, communicated with translators, with language service providers, with developers, trying to do the best, working late hours, trying to, organize or orchestrate all this localization process. And I had one VP. I mean, I have had great mentors in the industry. I have to say I'm very, very, very lucky, because one of the VPs that was in charge of all this tool change for software development, he came with the idea of compliance from the very beginning. For example, he set up the team in different areas, and globalization was part of this team. One was securability. If you develop software, it has to be secure. It has to be compliant with certain security rules or requirements that may vary depending on the country, may vary depending on the software. There are a lot of variables there. But there's no point of developing something which is not compliant to these security requirements. Okay? So instead of develop software something which is not compliant, let's make it compliant from the very, very beginning. So that was a shift left on security. Make it compliant. So we are not gonna accept anything which is not compliant. The first thing you have to do, obviously, is to identify which are these compliant, which are these requirements. Another area was the accessibility. By accessibility, especially in the US, means that you have to be compliant with certain legislation to make sure that the software can be accessed by anybody, blind, deaf, etc., and also in any kind of hardware, mobile or laptop or traditional desktops, any different navigator, etc. So there is an accessibility compliance, and in the US they are very, very, very strong on that. So again, there's no point of developing a software with great features, amazing options, if it is not going to be compliant. So if you are not going to be able to sell it because it's not compliant. So same with technical writers. You have to write technical documentation in a way that can be used by the consumer, the customer, obviously, but also that can be localized. There's no way if you write something that we cannot chant or we cannot reuse translation memories, etc. So there was another area of shift left, which was Devops. So make sure that you use the appropriate tools in agile environment to develop software following certain requirements. especially the agile development framework. And we also brought it at that time Localization, because it was the perfect tool, the perfect project that goes across all these other projects. So if you want to localize your project, you have to be compliant with certain requirements. In that case, software localization and documentation. If you're not complying with Unicode support, if your files are not stored in resource bundles, if your variables are used in an active way that basically make the content for translation basically nonsense for a translator, if you don't provide in-context translation, even with a screenshot or with a proper in-context editor, etc., we're not going to localize your software, because basically the cost is going to be too high and it's going to be upfront. Okay, so that's where the shift left approach idea came in on how, let's give the content creators, at that time was only software and documentation, but that can be moved to any other areas. Let's give them the power, the education, because some of the time they do things wrong or non-compliant because nobody has told them to do it in a different way.
Yes.
Okay, so let's invest in helping those teams to understand the requirement, to deliver files which are compliant, so we can automate the localization process. By automation means just use the technology in the area, the TMS technology, to manage files up and down, to apply TMs, to apply translation memory, and let's give more power and time to translators that will have to post-edit. Those are the guys that really matter on a localization process. And typically those are the guys that they don't have time, the rates may not be good enough for them. Let's put the focus on the left, developers, content creators, marketers. Let's automate as much as possible in the process. Let's eliminate as much as possible the role of the project manager. And again, this is something I'm becoming very unpopular I used to become very unpopular in the industry. Now, I get some feedback which start to be positive, which I'm glad. And let's help translators to have all the information they need. And before you start bombarding me with questions on the project manager, I'm not saying the project manager role is not important. It is very important, but we need to, it can be utilized in another way, in this educating technical writers, or educating the content creators, supporting translators, building this relationship with the customer, etc. Should not be used on creating quotes or dealing with translators trying to get resources, fighting for deadlines, etc.
Don't worry, I'm not going to bombard you with questions about project managers, because I basically came to the same conclusion that you did a long time before, like when I was working at Autodesk. So yeah, I think it's like one of the biggest waste in our industry, like when PMs have to manually copy, take the files from somewhere, store them somewhere, send millions of emails just to get things translated, a couple of words. So I totally support you on that. What I'm wondering more about is, you mentioned the education and the compliance when it comes to content creation. I'm wondering how you did that education. Did you create some material? Did you do it in person?
That was a very funny part of this story. And that applies to CA technology because it's a big company, so you may want to do it different with other companies. But that was so funny. I really enjoyed that part. We created a road show. So we were traveling to the different hubs. We were agile at that time.
Wow,
so that means developers were located in 5 major hubs. And they were agile and they have all these stand-ups, etc. So we went to these different hubs, development hubs. And we make a show, basically. I mean, we went on the stage. We asked them to come, we set up all these calls with a nice food and all this. And we basically we're explaining them what that means to be compliant with security, accessibility, technical writer, and localization. So we put together some villains and some heroes. Yes, it was so funny. So the villains, the focus, very important, the focus was hits to help heroes, okay? Because we were telling developers and technical writers that they were heroes, but they were attacked by certain villains. A villain could be hard-coded strings. A villain could be Unicode support. A villain could be security issues, etc. So particularly for localization, I really invented some villains, and we were using like all these cartoons, images.
Oh, I love it.
So we were telling them, hey, you are not doing a good job, basically because you cannot, because you really have to fight against those villains that they are not helping you to deliver, because basically you don't know what you have to deliver. So with that show, we held them, we were laying out very clearly to their requirements. So we were giving hacks to the heroes to fight the villains. Okay. And they love it, basically. They really love it. So in the localization area, basically I told them, okay, those are the INTN requirements, the internationalization requirements that you have to meet. Okay. If you are compliant with these requirements, and here you have the documentation, here you have a tool that was a source scanner that we have developed. Okay. That was basically integrated with the development environment. So use the scanner. They didn't even know there was a scanner that we have developed. Use the scanner and validate. There are going to be tons of thousands of false positives. Yes, we know, but use it so you will understand what are the requirements. And the answer was really positive. Basically, developers, they are developers. They want to be told what to use or how to do something, and they do it because they are really great minds. So the output was very good. I'm not going to say that everything was wonderful and overnight all the files were perfect, because we still have a lot of legacy products that were developed in a very waterfall process. This is something you have to cope with. You cannot really, but things started to change. We were getting, this shift-left approach also makes sense in this current scenario, because you don't get any more huge files of software for translation. You get small chunks, very often, but a small chunk, which is the agile localization. Well, I don't like to call it agile localization. It doesn't mean anything, but this is like the continuous localization for software or for products developed in agile environment. You get the small chunks, okay, small chunk of context. So the management is really easy or simple. Let's put it simple. Let's say simple, because it's really, you don't need like 3 months to translate something, because the volumes are going to be small. So they started to realize that, and they were very happy and very eager to help. And we really have a lot of fun with these villains and heroes approach that we use.
You mainly mentioned developers. Did you have a different strategy to educate marketing people or people who were creating documentation?
That was our next customer, like internal stakeholder. We didn't go that we didn't reach that far. But yes, I think we would have a different strategy, because they use different tools and because the content is very different. So marketing works in a different way. Definitely you have a lot of work, or, we can do a lot from a terminology point of view, for product name point of view, for consistency. And machine translation may not work that well in that area. So this is something you want to think about. Okay. However, from an automation point of view, marketing is a great opportunity, because most of the teams typically still work very isolated, creating their own content with their own templates. So bringing all this team into a proper content management system for marketing content so they can reuse and they can be consistent. That's something, I mean, some companies may be doing very good on there, but I see an opportunity there, especially with, for example, pharmaceutical company. They don't really have, the trend is to have, a lot of individual creation there, which I think this is an opportunity for content management organization. And once you have a content management in place, then you can automate. If you don't have a content management in place, you cannot automate. So that's one of the requirements if you want the shift left approach. This is the keep the source in the content management. For developers, it's relatively easy because at the least they're going to be using GitHub. But for other areas, for technical writers, it's also easy because they are used to content management. For areas like marketing or e-commerce, things become more challenging, but that's even funnier.
So you mentioned, you shared with us how you handled education within CA. I'm wondering how you approach education now with your company, with your clients.
I'm doing a very similar approach. I haven't get to the point of a road show yet, but I'm planning to do that with a couple of clients. But for me, the first thing you have to do is to understand how they work. What are they doing? Why they do the things they do in the way they do it? And what are their requirements? And this is like a big part of the effort. Sitting next to a developer, to a technical writer, to a marketer, to anybody, and trying to understand their requirement. Once you have the requirement, then for me, the second part is to see how can we organize that in a content management system if they don't have it, or if they already have, how can we get it better? And put together best practices or user guides on how to create that content. And once the source is clean, organized, then you can go for a TMS to enable this automation. And I'm talking my clients typically are large, medium or large corporations that they do have huge volume. This for a small company may not make sense. Maybe with a SharePoint type of organization, it's enough. But this is the idea, and this has to be customized for the different customers on the different sides of the different companies.
Why are small companies not a good fit for this? Is it because of the low volume of content? It doesn't pay off?
Could be. Exactly. I'm not saying it's not good, but it's, the investment, there's an investment, like a initial investment to get everything organized. If this initial, you have to calculate the cost, the overall cost, people and translation cost, and, understand, and even infrastructure and everything to understand what's the baseline. So this is what you are spending now in the localization of your digital content, and then evaluate. I mean, if where can you reduce the cost? If the overall doesn't pay off, meaning that you need to invest a lot in a CMS, but the volume or the content or the updates, because if you only need localization twice a year, maybe you don't need such an automated, perfect and ideal process. So it's a bit, but still, I'm very interested in small companies also because they may not need like a huge new automated process, but they do need help to go to the digital transformation on the digital content, multilingual digital content. So that's an area, that is worth investment, especially that those small companies with an e-commerce that, they are starting to grow. It goes to a point that if they don't stop and start delivering the content in a structured way, the technical depth they're going to get from a localization perspective is going to be so good, so huge that they will not be able to deliver. So there's room for improvement on every area. And for me, the most important part is really to understand the requirements, to understand the roadmap, what the strategy, a long-term strategy, and to see where this can be happening.
In my experience, the large companies usually have their internal localization team, as was your experience from CA.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, how do you come into the picture in this scenario where there's like a dev team and there's a localization team? Do you try to like get them together to talk and like see like what they could do together and then you just leave? Or are you mainly focusing on companies that don't have a localization internal team?
I'm focusing on both type of companies, to be honest. I have analyzed, if you want, companies which are huge localization team, huge, more than 100 people. Half of them in developers in India, half of them in the US. I mean, huge. And they were very proud of the process, very proud, because they have a great process full of manual steps. I mean, that was their baby. They love it, but it's nonsense. Because really, with the technology we have today, these things can be done in a different way. And so going back to your question, sorry, I think there's room for improvement, because either a mature company with a very solid localization process, when you see or when you have a look from the outside, there's a lot of things that can be changed and can be improved. And the goal is not to terminate people or to reduce the team, or should not be, but to add, to make them do whatever task or roles they have, to make sure they can provide added value to the process instead of going around in circles with non-automatic or all processes. And again, I'm very in favor of changing roles. You may be an internal translator, but the volume may be high. So why don't you get a vendor, spend time as an internal translator, as a subject matter expert for that particular thing, spend time in educating the vendor, in giving them the proper education with videos or webinars or whatever. And then maybe you can spend part of your time doing spot checks or managing terminology. Terminology is one of the, unfortunately, the forgotten in our area, because nobody had time to do terminology management. Because the deadlines are all so short, and that spending time and resources in terminology traditionally has been a challenge. So why don't we dedicate people that knows the content and the language, spend time in terminology, so this can be shared afterwards with translators. So it's really, I see transformation of the roles in the future, not eliminating people, but transforming the job they do and getting them doing more added value tasks on the day-to-day.
You mentioned technology. Of course, technology plays a huge role in the continuous localization. So I'm wondering that for your clients, like, do you have any preferred solutions that you suggest to them that they should use as a technology, or is it based on what works better for each client?
It is totally based on what works better for each client. I don't have any preferred technology. In fact, I think the current technologies are getting old. Again, I'm challenging the industry right now. Okay, I'm not saying they're not good technologies, but they're starting to get old. Artificial intelligence, that's the major driving of the new technology that we will be using in the next years. And we do have what is most important for artificial intelligence, which is data. It's something that translation companies and companies doing translation have, is that they have data, because we have translation memory, because we have glossaries, because we have workflows. So we do have the data. So technology in the future has to be driven by artificial intelligence and by management by exception. Most of the technologies today, they are still too much focused on the project management role. So the technology needs a PM, a project manager, to set up the project, to validate that everything goes fine, to get the quote, to send whatever. So the focus is still the project manager, instead of getting the focus on the content and the translation. I mean, the TMS should be able to automatically assign the tasks to the translators that did this task before, or they have proven expertise on a particular area or a particular language. There should be automatic ways of validating the translations, for example. And this is something we created MVP at CA. We created technology that would, if you are like a junior translator, okay, you're going to be paid small because you're going to be learning and you are going to be reviewed. So you will have somebody reviewing you and providing you with feedback in the system, everything in the system. So the more you learn, the higher rate you will have for translation, because the risk that you make mistake is lower because you'll be learning. So your review task is going to be lower, smaller. Okay. So that time you find a balance to review, because you review, you get the review because you are learning. The more you improve, the less you are review, because there is less risk of mistakes.
And all this balancing you had automated?
Yes.
Really? Wow.
Artificial intelligence. They can do it. I don't know how to do it, but it can be done.
I like it.
In fact, we were developing something like that in this innovation. But obviously, the main challenge with CA, and it was my challenge, not the company, is that CA was not a translation agency. They were a software development company. So even if I was trying to develop tools for localization, that was not their focus. So obviously we were able to put together all these tools and MVPs, but they wouldn't develop them because obviously that's not what
it wasn't their business. Yeah.
So that was good because some of the ideas we had at that time are starting to happen now. Their team is now that they have a lot of artificial intelligence and they're able to automate, etc. So going back to your question, or if I have preferred tools, no, not yet. Maybe I'll end up developing the best tool ever. I don't know. But another area which I think TMS in general still have some area of improvement is on data reporting. The way data is reported in the TMS, quality data, because review, content, everything should be done in the TMS with proper categorization, etc. So time to delivery, work-ons. Work-ons is maybe the only one they're doing good because that's how they get, how the cost is calculated. But time to deliver, review work, sample review, posted distance. I mean, anything you can imagine, the CMS should be able to provide this type of information in a way it can be digested. I mean, some of these CMS, they do have plenty of export files with logs, amazing, but you need to go to an external tool and, and import that data and start trying to create this. And this data, typically you don't have it real time because there is this import export process in the middle. So for me, this is another area of, where these tools can be improved.
Mm-hmm.
Another area, in my opinion, for improvement, now that we have data, for example, and this is not so focused on the tool, but on the client, is on what to translate. This is one of the challenges we used to have at CA. Basically, we were translating what product owners or product teams or market or salespeople were thinking they wanted to sell. Okay. But it was very hard to get a feedback on the usage of this localized version.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, previous the cloud area, there was no way of getting any feedback. Once you go to the cloud, then you calculate the names, time downloads, etc. It's kind of, it's easier, or this is an area where you can start improving. Although it's very difficult to know which language or which local the user is using, because it's depending on the browser, etc. But taking translation decisions based on the usage of this content or the demand of a particular market, that's also very, very interesting. Gaming companies are doing a good job there. Gaming localization, because they do have first-hand data or information on the user behavior, of the user experience. So they're doing a good job, because for them it's very easy to collect this information and make the right decisions on what to translate. And obviously, because gaming is such a personal thing, that your audience is going to be, anybody that wants to play. With software companies like CA, the audience for large companies like CA was developers. And today, most of the developers know English, at least from a reading or development point of view. So you may not need to translate to that many languages, and the way the documentation is done today is really different. In the area at the beginning, you have these huge user guides that were static, that you cannot edit. Now, documentation doesn't exist anymore. It's really a database, and users can add content, support adds content, developers add content. So this is a huge mare magnum of text that may not follow any static structure. So that's also very interesting to analyze.
Yeah, let's talk about the user-generated content. Like, how do you think the continuous localization fits in? Because I think that's like a primary candidate for full automation, right? Without even like any person touching anything.
And the only way continuous localization can fit in is using machine translation for user-generated content. I mean, there's no way you can translate and keep everything up to date or sync user-generated content. So machine translation is the way right direction to go. Generate multilingual bots for help desk, for example, and get neural machine translation. And, neural machine translation is amazing how good it is and how quickly you can train it to get, language, to fulfill the language requirement. In the past, language means, or at least in our area, means grammar and terminology and structure. Now, there's no, people speak in a very different way. They do make typos, they invent new words and abbreviation. So machine translation has to quickly pick up this information and reuse and use it for localization. Mm-hmm. It had happened to me, and in the area, in the industry, it happened to me. The answer was in Spanish. It was good. The only thing I found is strange is that it was taking quite long. The reply was taking long. Taking long maybe means 5 minutes. It's not, but that was what made me think this is machine translation. I don't know if there was some posterity, because there are companies that, do that.
Yes.
Forced doing posterity, empty. But the output was really good, and it was good enough for me to have a conversation, because my self company was, I was not able to call from home because there was some kind of issue with the with the cell phone company, whatever. But it was amazing. It was amazing how good they are.
You mentioned the term management by exception. So for people who don't know what it means, could you quickly describe what it means?
Yeah. management by exception means to set up a process in a way that everything is automated. Everything goes, on its own. So there's no surprises. That you have certain standard content, standard proof of translation, standard translation memos. So you did set up a process. You set up deadlines, requirements, and it goes along. That's management by exception. The only thing the exception means that if something happened, like deadline not met, TM not applied, whatever, something happened, you should be able to identify this with a ticket, with a flag, with a dashboard, so you can take an action. So your action is to solve whatever exception or whatever problem is. Your action as PM in that case is not setting up the workflow. This is something you do once and you reuse many. So this is the concept of management by exception. Again, going back to the previous question of if small companies need that, depend of the volume. I mean, the volume is more smaller. You don't have like huge jobs or small jobs, but very frequently, maybe you don't need such a huge setup to manage by exception.
This might be a tricky question. I'm not sure if you can answer it, but let's give it a try. So when we are talking about small companies or medium or large, it doesn't matter. In all cases, it will be the ROI, right, of the investment. So I'm wondering like how you would help these companies determine the ROI, because that's like a very fuzzy question in our industry as well,
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. And I have a colleague that he works with us in one of the webinars we do explaining all this shift left approach, and he is specialized in ROI.
Ah, nice.
So ROI is not return of investment. I mean, it is return of investment, obviously, but not in an area. ROI really means how more automation you can do in a process, how quickly you can be, how happy your customer is going to be. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to get like a numeric ROI. It's really impossible sometimes. But you can seize the opportunity, for example, the opportunity you are missing, the market opportunity you are missing if you don't localize. So instead of trying to see, we spend X now, and if we automate, we will spend X minus whatever. You should say, okay, we have a potential market in China or in Japan of that many millions. If we don't localize, these guys will not be using this software in this language. Obviously, depend on the software, depend on the product, but that's sometimes the idea we have to put together in order to justify an ROI. An ROI is really the opportunity you are seizing, and also the user experience. As I said, we already mentioned that if you are developing for developers in China, maybe they speak in good English enough to set up your product, and if they need help, you can go through an automatic chat box. So maybe your focus is not to do full perfect translation of the full content. But if you're doing that for Japan, maybe that's it has to be a different approach, because the requirements in Japan are very different. If you're translating for France or Canada, which the sensibility or the cultural aspect of the language are so important, you may want to take all the decisions. Okay, so that's, I think, for me the way the ROI should be presented on taking into account the cultural intelligence, the cultural requirements for the different countries, and looking at the opportunity you are missing. Obviously, you can also add a part to say, okay, now you have 20 people managing the system, and maybe you can reduce to less people, more automation. Obviously, this is also a part you can also bring in. But when you go into those companies that they don't really have any process in place, calculating the baseline, it's going to be even impossible, because there are so many parties involved that you cannot really calculate the baseline. So finding the ROI or demonstrated or putting together an ROI in a traditional way, forget it in our industry. You really have to go for these other ways of analyzing and calculating. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, another ROI is that the globalization team or the localization team, especially for large corporations, it's really so across all the departments. So we end up helping other people to make their life easier with a proper content management system, with a proper requirements for localization, etc. So this is also important, because you are really facilitating somebody else day to day. So this has to be taken into account from an ROI point of view. Okay, that it's not that we as localization are going to reduce cost, is that this other team is going to be able to produce more because we are simplifying the way they content or they outsource the content for localization.
When we were talking about the technologies, you mentioned AI. So obviously it's related to NMT. I'm wondering if you have any other ideas how you think AI will affect localization.
Well, obviously about how we will report data, the different data of usage, and from the localization perspective, also from the consumer perspective. I think that's also very critical on areas that we are going to improve. And another area which is not that popular, but my personal opinion is going to start growing, is on subtitling and dubbing. We are going more and more to video, visual content, and getting that subtitle. And obviously this is where artificial intelligence plays a major role also on how can you speech to text. How can you automate all this transcreation from this channel to another? How can you do that? I think that's also going to be very, very, very critical in the future. And this is starting now. If you listen to my kids talking to Alexa or Siri, they're best friends. If I talk to Alexa, it's a nightmare. She doesn't understand me. I try to tell her, please turn off the light, and it wouldn't. Then my kids come and say, Mama, tell her that, and it works. So the new generations, the way they grow, they are inheriting all these new patterns. So we need to start thinking on that, because they're not going to be reading localized text. They're going to be listening to something. And as they set up something, they will have a voice saying, click here, add this comment. I don't know, but that's going to happen. So we need to get there. And again, all this is fostered by artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Same as with the click. Again, my kids, they don't click anything. They don't click a mouse anymore. They basically swipe the screens. They do all this manual swapping up and down. They even found my kid the other day. He was trying to light, to light the light, and he was, instead of clicking on the commute, he was basically swapping with his hand, like trying to. And he told me, it doesn't work. The light, it doesn't work. No, you have to click. And he was surprised because he was used to, I don't know if this is the right word, but when you move your hand,
it's swipe left,
swipe. And I thought, well, man, yeah, of course. That's the world you're living in. Of course, this is all technology. Clicking, turn on the light.
Yeah, I thought that when you were saying this, I thought that you meant he had an app on his phone and he was swiping it to turn off the light.
No, basically on the
actual physical.
On the actual thing. On the actual thing.
Got it.
First of all, he was disappointed because he was shouting at the thing and nothing happened. The light would not turn on. And secondly, he was on the wall trying to do that. He's a baby, obviously, but that's what, that's how they are growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe one thing we could discuss is the quality aspect of continuous localization and all this automation, do you think there is an impact, or do you think it actually improves the quality?
I think it improves the quality. Again, continuous localization by definition means small chunks of text. So the quality is easy to keep high quality with small chunks of text. Obviously, and for me, especially in software documentation, localization, in context translation is also a must. There is a lot of waste of managing queries up and down. And this is one of the sort of project manager tasks that is really huge. Managing spreadsheets, sending a spreadsheet somewhere else, sharing a spreadsheet with different languages with the same question, etc.
Yeah.
So continuous localization quality is going to be improved as long as you are able to automate all these non-profitable tasks, like for imagine, just add a comment in the software. Maybe ask make sure developers are aware of that variables translators need to know what are they going to be replaced by, if it is a day or a number or an order, whatever, and not comment as you develop the software. And because you have developed in small chunks, it's not like an this is not something you can do as an afterthought. Have you finished a software, you cannot say, okay, now comment all the variables. No, this is not going to work. But if they do it from the very beginning and they add comments, which translators can see in their CAT tool, but these variables will be replaced for that. That's extremely helpful, and this supports quality. One of the tools we developed at CA was basically what we call context TM. Okay, and the developers, when they were supposed to turn over the files, for every word that was ambiguous, like file, what that's file mean? It's a noun, it's a verb. So for those strings that were single word strings, we created a database, and that was a huge effort. But we did create a database with different options. File in German may have 1, 2, 3 possible translations. In Spanish, 1, 2. In that other country or language may not be ambiguous. So we would ask the developers, okay, what do you mean? File as in file, like noun as, and based on the translation, based on the answer of the developers, and basically they had to choose one A, B, C. So it was really easy for them, or they could even add a comment if they wanted. We already had the translation in OTM for all languages. So that particular segment that was ambiguous, the translator would not even get it for translation, because we would get the translation from this context TM. That's what we call it. So that we were eliminating a huge amount of queries and waste and last minute updates and and waiting for developers to answer the queries, etc. So that type of approach really helped in continuous localization. Again, this is education. We go back to the education part. We have to ask developers, to learn that if they comment any possible ambiguity or variable from a translation point of view, this is going to be continuous. Otherwise, it's not going to be continuous. There's one more thing which affects continuity, especially in an agile environment, which is testing, localization testing. This has changed a lot in the industry, and I know if you used to work for Autodesk, I'm sure you were involved in huge rounds of localization testing.
Yes.
Different languages. That is not happening anymore. You need use pseudo localization. If you use pseudo localization, you can test it in any language.
Can you explain for people who don't know what it means? Pseudo localization.
Sure. Pseudo localization is basically to replace the text, the source text, in English or whatever language, with the same text with prefix and suffix, which is like nonsense text. And typically you try to add some non-standard characters. So you can really see that, like accents or special numbers. So you can see that it displays okay in any environment. So basically, developers would get this file pseudo translated, and they would create a build, pseudo translated build. And in that pseudo translated build or pseudo localized build, they are able to identify potential issues, issues, display issues, or truncations. For example, in German, most probably the text is going to be longer, so you have to make sure developer allow enough space. With the cloud systems now, post-based things are easier, but basically developers can be trained and educated to identify, or testers can be trained and educated to identify these potential localization issues and get them fixed before localization. And this is compliant, then you can send it to translation, send it back, and you don't need to do any more testing like it used to be in the past, because it has really been tested in this pseudo language. That's what I mean by continuous localization and pseudo localization, sorry.
I know that we are doing some pseudo localization, and I can see the benefit of testing pseudo localized build at early stage. But I'm still wondering if there's something that we're missing if we're not testing the actual localized product.
Let's put it that way. There is no risk zero approach. Okay, what you can do is to reduce the risk. If you do pseudo localization, if you provide translation in context to translators, basically they see they are translating on a web application, they see the context as they translate, or they have a screenshot associated to each string they are translating. If you control the text, the source text, if you write in a way, you eliminate ambiguities. You write for machine translation, okay, like proper sentences, taking into account that this is software, so you may not have proper sentences. But if you follow certain best practices, and if you eliminate also possible ambiguities like variables, the meaning of the variables, or if you eliminate hard-coded string, which is what you identify during this localization, then the risk of making mistakes is really reduced. So maybe you can go for that option. You have to think that if you need to add testing, like traditional testing in an agile environment, in an agile localization environment or agile development environment, if you are testing, that means it's not agile or it's not continuous anymore. So it's really difficult to do anything afterwards. Maybe maybe because everything is so flexible now from a development point of view, maybe you want to release whatever, if you follow these best practices, release what you have, and maybe then you can spend some time doing a final validation on the actual live application. Okay, you can take the risk, and if all of a sudden you realize there are a lot of mistakes, then there is something wrong. But putting together this plan on doing this final validation on the live application, it should be the right approach for this agile development process, because it's so easy to update those files. Maybe if you find a mistake, you update the files in the system, and to create another build, they do builds every night sometimes. So it's really, it's going to be 24 hours that they are is out there. So you can take the risk. Terminology, you didn't mention that, but terminology is also key here. You manage terminology properly. So translators can concentrate on translating with the proper terminology.
Before we ventured into testing localization, you were talking about the queries, and that the queries are greatly reduced with continuous localization. But I can still imagine that there will be queries at some point. So I'm wondering, because I don't know exactly how this works, but if you have developers and the content flows directly to translators, how can translators ask queries back to developers so that it's not stuck on PMs?
Okay. We're talking about software development now. This my proposal may not work for marketing staff, for example. Okay. But there's a very easy way of doing that. connect your TMS to developers issue tracking system, Jira or whatever they use it. So they will get a query in the queue, and they have to answer it because otherwise they cannot deliver. The key here, so that's the solution. Basically, make sure it becomes developer problem. It is not a project manager problem. It has to be developer problem. The point here is how to do these queries in the right way, and this is a translator's education. Okay, you cannot ask, translators cannot ask, say, I don't understand, what do you mean, or what is the translation? You really have to educate developer, and this is something we did at CA. You have to educate translators on the right question. For example, if you have a doubt, something is ambiguous, or the grammar, English grammar is something you cannot understand, you need to say, okay, well, do you mean A or do you mean B? Make it very easy for developers. Developers are developers, ones and zeros. You don't really need to give them, to some things that are too precise. Let's make it very simple for them. So, the translator has to be educated in writing, asking the right questions in the right way. And you have to make sure you don't duplicate questions. You don't want the same question asked by
different
translators or different languages, things like that. But that would be the approach. Integrate that into the development path. We have not talked about doneness criteria in the agile software development, but localization compliance, internationalization should be part of the doneness criteria, meaning that you cannot localize, or the iteration in agile is not finished until localization is done and tested and completed properly. Okay. If we go, maybe I'm going a little bit technical, but in the agile framework, internationalization or localization are not considered like doneness criteria. They are really considered as I don't remember the name right now, but they are not core functions. They are something that is transversal to different teams, that they don't really, they are not core components. They should become core components. This is something I have already discussed with the Agile framework team. Hopefully someday they will, I will be able to put the business case in place. So they change the requirement, non-functional requirement. Exactly. Localization and internationalization are considered non-functional requirements, meaning it's good to have, but it's not an obligation, and they should become functional requirements. So doneness criteria of the different iterations should be that if localization is required, has to be done. And if you have 2 weeks iteration, developers will want to automate as much as possible. Otherwise, they won't be able to do it.
Right. You're talking about the quality of NMT, and you were saying that it's like very, very good. I know in my earlier episodes, I was covering an article. I don't know his name, but I think he's the father of Trados. He created Trados, and he was saying also pretty much the same thing, that NMT will eventually take over because the quality is getting better every day. And he was thinking about how the role of translators will change. So I'm wondering, what do you think will happen to translators if NMT gets super good?
Good question. First of all, maybe we should point the question in a different way. It's not that the NMT is getting good or super good, which is, but it's really fulfilling the requirements. It doesn't have to be, let's don't talk about quality like grammar, etc. No, it's really fulfilling the requirement for that particular use case. Okay, if you are in a chat box, you don't need perfect grammar.
Right.
You need understandable content. So MT is getting better and better for that particular area that is really fulfilling the scope of that translation, or the expectation, the user experience, which is something we are not talking about, and we should start talking more. So what happened for the translators? Translation on the areas we are translating today may not be as critical as it is today. So there will be a shift. Translators will become more boutique translation. So translating content which is not that technical or which is not maybe more focused on marketing or creativity content, etc. But technical content will change, and translators will become more maybe post editors or validators of the neural machine translation, depending on the areas. But I do see a shift on the way translators work. I definitely, but I don't think they will disappear. But they will have to work in a different. It's similar, if I'm allowed to say that, to the translators the way you used to be in the early 70s, which basically they were they had a book, something in paper, like a book, and they basically were translating in a Word, and a very old Word, and they have to print it and send it back to the editor, things like that. That will change. Technology will help us to work in another way. One of the questions I think we could ask, and I may not have the answer, so I'm asking myself a question right now, is what will happen with language service providers. The way language service providers are set up today. That's also very interesting question. Because disintermediation, I think, or I foresee, will also be one of the trends we will see in the future. Because if you have technology that can do or can take tasks that traditionally were doing a language service provider, which basically, for example, having a pool of translators, technology will allow to go more from a crowdsourcing approach. A crowdsourcing meaning you pay the translators for what they done. It's not free translation. That was something that was very confusing at the beginning. Basically, translators can self-assign the task that they get in a particular pool. These tasks that are appropriate for them based on the expertise, on the knowledge area, on the deadline, etc., on the previous tasks, etc. So why do you need a language service provider if technology can put or connect the requester with the translator? Let's see how it works. I'm not saying that language service providers will disappear, but I think they have to reinvent, or they will end up reinventing themselves. There will be a separation about technology providers and language service, like pure language service providers. I think this is happening right now. Not many companies are able to deliver both, and those that are doing, which are the huge, big traditional LSPs or MLB, I think they are getting very old technology, and they need to invest a lot in make that technology more flexible. So let's see how it goes. I'm not saying they're going to disappear. I'm not saying something's going to happen in the short time, but in the long run and the long time, this is going to change. And maybe one of the new the transformation they, in my opinion, they will go through, will end up doing this more boutique translation for other type of content, or other tasks like validating or different content, or testing applications like live application, not traditional testing, or doing ABC testing. I mean, there are a lot of other areas they can commute in a way. Everything which is related to cultural intelligence and user experience. How to write, how to translate, what to translate, this type of analysis, or this is for me something that an LSP or multi-language vendor could be doing in the future. So the business, I don't think, is any longer in the translation itself, but should be in this added value, in these other tasks or services that they can provide. I was talking with an LSP the other day, and they were doing very good on on post-editing machine translation for chatbots. Okay, so basically, the chatbot was using neural MT with the intents and the utterance and all this. This neural MT was training with this type of content. So the communication was between the user and the requester was via neural, but all this content was kind of stored and was sent to translation afterwards. So those translations were adjusted, and then the MT engine was retrained on a situation. So the task was really to adjust in a very simple way, because again, it was an IT chatbot, so you don't expect perfect grammar, but it was cleaning up those empty answers. Yeah, it is not even posterity, it's really like cleaning up, so it can be, the engine can be trained out of that. So it's not the actual translation because the service is already done, completed, but recreating content or creating content to train the engine. That for me was one example of new tasks that those companies maybe end up doing.
So let's look into the crystal ball one more time, and let's talk about project managers, because we were talking about project managers before.
I knew you were gonna hit me with that.
No, I'm just wondering, like, what do you think? How do you see their role shifting with more automation happening?
The way I see the role shifting is really on educating the requesters, educating the business, understanding their requirements, and setting the proper strategy for that particular customer on that particular content, and helping translators on the day-to-day, not like looking for translator or selecting translators, but really helping them that they have all the information, that they get their queries answered, if any, that validating that the files that are sent to the translators through the system are compliant or follow certain best practices, etc. And acting or taking action if there is an exception, of something goes wrong for whatever reason. That should be the exception.
What do you think is wrong with our industry? Where do I start?
I think we have a great industry. I love this industry, and I always have things to learn. Obviously, that's not a joke. It's true. But, and I think it happens with any industry. Okay, my impression is that we are getting old. Technology is getting old. We are not able to accommodate or to innovate, taking into account the changes that are happening. Okay, so that gives us a lot of opportunities, a great opportunity, let's put it that way. But one of the customers I have now, they're doing an RFI for a TMS, and we are evaluating several TMS in order to fulfill the customer requirements. And what I noticed is that those different TMS, they try to change the way the customer work so it can fit the TMS. And that's not, should be flexible.
Yeah.
It's really, we have this discussion about with one of the customer of the potential TMS, and there was, I was not really understanding what they were saying, because one of the workflows we may have is just machine translation. We, just get something machine translated, get it back so you can test or something. And the TMS particular, the focus was the TM. And they might realize that you cannot create the workflow without going through a TM, because the TM used to be the center of the TMS. And things are changing. Again, you may not want to use a TM because your content may not be good enough because it's only machine translated. So you don't want to maintain TMs which have not been properly post-edited. But those TMs may be created later. Okay, so that flexibility, and this is just an example, that flexibility is what we should be able to accommodate. And in defense of the technologies providers, it's not easy. It's not easy because some of these tools are very old, so they have a very solid structure, very, very solid structure, but it's not flexible. And today, everything works, the way software is developed is with small modules that, containers that they work independently, and you just get the container you need for that particular action. And traditionally, those all software technology are more like a core technology which you cannot change. And I understand it's not easy to reinvent or to revamp or to create something totally new. But I think we should move away from these monolithic tools and try to go to something more flexible in order to accommodate the requirements of the customers, which will change continuously.
So how does your day look like right now when you're working for your own business? When do you wake up? How do you start your day?
Oh my God, it's really, I'm learning to work when I have opportunity because apart from the particular situation we have now with this COVID-19 pandemic, which is totally, unexpected and unusual, my day to day is really, spend most of my time in LinkedIn, reading what other people say, understanding what are the requirements, looking for articles to understand, get new ideas, or to understand how things are changing, etc. So that's most of my time, really trying to get these ideas or to think how can we do things in a different way. And when I'm working on particular customers, most of my time is really talking to the users, understanding the requirement. And then I will write the document or a procedure or a wiki page for that particular customer with the information they want. But most of my time is really talking and communicating with everybody. I have not realized that until you make my question that most of my day is really because traditionally I was supposed to be productive, producing something, but I'm not. I'm really thinking and trying to see how can I accommodate the new tendencies to the different customers, to their requirements. Another thing I do spend a lot of time is participating in other initiatives which are not directly related with my company, but with connecting to other people, and especially women. I'm part of Women in Localization. I spend some time there and leading the metrics part, so trying to understand how can we make metrics for the organization. But and that's really good because you happen to meet a lot of people, which is very inspiring. And it really helps me to talk to people in other companies and to understand their challenges. So connecting to people, especially women, that we have this amazing, way of sharing information and mentoring each other. It's really good part of my job. I also participate in some other local organizations like Wompreneur, which is a community for women entrepreneurs, and talking to them and participating in the events, communicating, explaining my challenges really helps me to understand what people need, what can I offer to them. So when I started my own company, I had like a very naive and great idea from my point of view of what I wanted to do. And my obsession was to get a business plan. This is, I'm going to do this. And through all this journey, I have realized that's in today's industry, unless you have like something you want to develop a prototype, you have, you know what you want. The way you have to approach is really having the ability to understand and take the decisions or provide whatever customer wants or your potential client wants based on their needs. Don't try to put your idea to apply to sell your idea. No, it doesn't work because your idea may be great, but may not fix to that particular customer. However, if you pivot it a little bit and you open your eyes and you don't stubborn with your idea, it really gives you a lot of opportunities. So talking, listening, it's really most part of my day to day.
Do you have any morning ritual? Like, what do you do first thing in the morning, and how exactly do you start working? Like, what is the first thing you do?
Okay, I do something which I hate, but I do. I used to do before the pandemic. Yeah, no, I'm not. I mean, I hate. That's not a hate. I mean, I'm not an early person. I'm a morning, so I'm a late person. So I kind of more creative at night. But what I do in the mornings is, or I used to do before the pandemic, is that I would get up at 5:45, which is very, very early for me. And with two best friends in the neighborhood, we would go for a walk, like a 45-minute walk. In winter, summer, anytime. And so by 6:45, 6:45, we would be back home. So to start, kids and all this stuff. But that 45 minutes talking with my best friends, walking quickly and doing some exercise, it's really very fulfilling. And typically we don't talk about work because each of us work in a different thing. But it really helps me to wake up, to listen to people, to learn how to listen, to understand what are the requirements in other areas. But that's something I can apply in my day to day. So yes, this morning walking, sometimes we walk, sometimes we go to the swimming pool, which is good because then typically when I swim, I do my to-do list. I get out of the swimming pool with a very clear idea of what it's like meditation, I guess. But when I get out of the swimming pool, I'm clear on what are the priorities.
Oh, is that where you plan your day? At a swimming pool?
Pool. It's really stupid, but it works. It really works.
So does it mean that you prefer to-do lists versus calendars? Do you use calendars just for meetings? How do you combine these two?
No, yeah, I'm learning, okay, because I'm really learning, but prioritizing is very important. It's so trying to get the big picture of what you have and assigning time to each task. So I'm going to spend 4 hours with this customer for that particular task. So I'm going to spend 2 hours in the media because you could spend days in the media. I'm going to spend that many hours on writing best practices for whatever. Assign, trying to get the whole week. Typically I leave Friday blank because they are always something which is expected on Friday. So I put that on Friday. And typically I try to do like 3 days for customers, 1 day for media, etc., and Friday for whatever could fit. So that's how I organize. And I always try to make sure I have this list of what to do, assign time, to make sure I'm productive and recategorize it depending on how it goes. This is something I'm still working on that and I'm learning. I'm not going to say I'm the perfect one because I'm not at all, but I'm learning. This is very different to what I used to work in the corporation, because in the corporation, basically it was like, putting down fires all the time. and now I have the impression I can, organize a team and assign time depending on, tasks. Time management is very important. And one of these associations I'm participating here in Barcelona, they are really preaching on how to do this time management, how to organize, how to set priorities in order to be very productive. And I'm learning a lot. I mean, I'm really learning a lot by talking to these ladies.
What are you curious about right now?
My problem is that I'm curious of anything. That's a problem because that means
I know. You have to prioritize, right?
You have to prioritize. So I'm the one that somebody says, "Oh, maybe we should do." I can do it. Or maybe we should go in, either with the family. Somebody needs to organize. I can organize. So I try to stop doing things as much as possible because I would I mean, I would do a lot of things. I love doing things. What am I curious about? I'm very curious about, going back to the technology part, to the to all this quantum technology, this new technology which is approaching regarding how to maintain all these databases, how to trace all the information, this bitcoins, technology behind the
blockchain.
Blockchain, exactly. I'm very curious because I think this is something we will be able to apply to an industry. I don't know how yet, but definitely we will be able. So this is one of the areas that I have to say I don't know much, and I know there are a couple of initiatives starting to think of that. So that's an area I think we should start looking at together with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, you should definitely check out episode number 24, where I spoke with Oksana Tkach, and she actually had an idea which relates blockchain to translation industry and how translators could use it. So
I will listen to it for you, absolutely, because this is going to happen. I told you, I didn't know about this episode, but I told you this is going to happen.
Yeah. If you want, I can get you in touch with her if you find it interesting, based on what she says. Okay, let's wrap it up. Is there anything I should have asked you, but I didn't?
No, I think.
So I did a pretty good job, right?
Yeah, and I'm surprised because when you mentioned that was going to be like a 2 hours call, I thought, wow, this is not going to happen. It's impossible. But this is in 2 hours already.
We did it. Yeah. That's a lot of good information that you shared with us. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So final words from yourself, if you could talk to everyone in the industry, what is it what you would say?
Start challenging the technology, the process, the way of doing things, because things are going to change, and we need to challenge, and don't be afraid of changes. Changes are good. So let's, look at every new challenge like an opportunity of doing something different, of learning something different. I know this is very standard. Everybody, it's like a mantra. But, even this opportunity with the COVID-19, I mean, my husband, we are very opposite characters. We love each other, but we are opposite characters. So for him, this is like, oh my God, 40 days locked up home. This is horrible. I cannot go biking. For me, it's an opportunity to spend more time with my husband, to cook. I think cooking, which I'm a horrible cooker. But now it's getting better and better. I'm reading a lot. I'm spending time with kids. I'm, doing sport, following this Instagram stuff, and I'm doing sport with the kids and listening to music, watching series. So for me, it's been locked down. I'm working on my project, on my website, and all these tasks I don't have time. So what I want to say is that there's always different ways of looking at things. You can be depressed or upset because your technology is I don't want to say not good, because it may be great technology, but it has to be aligned to the trends in the area, in the evolution, in the innovation, or you can take that as an opportunity to go further. This is something I also learned at CA, because we really developed amazing technology that was never used. Basically because it was not the right time, because it was not the right priority. But most of the things we developed at that time, like 8 years ago, they are now in the market. So, I mean, although I was extremely frustrated at that time, as you can imagine, I learned a lot of it. And I think I can talk about things the way I talk now, because I have this previous frustrating experience where I could not understand why such a good idea was not working. And basically, it was not a problem with the idea. It was a problem with the moment, the time, the stakeholders, etc. So it's always good to have the flexibility of mind to adapt to new challenge and new technology.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Patricia.
Nice to talk to you.
Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Talk to you. Thank you. Bye.